Pho is one of those dishes that I hold near and dear to my heart. It just brings me back so many memories every time I eat it. It's warm, it's comforting, it's essentially soul food in a bowl. Let me show you how to make this. I will start this delicious dish by preparing my onions. The first thing I'm going to do is top and tailing my onion, and at the root end I just take off the root part so that, the dirty parts inside the roots don't get into my broth. And then I just go ahead and slice it in half from end to end, and then I just peel off the outer layer. You can leave it on if you want, but I just like peeling it off. I get that on a baking tray that I will use later to bake/broil these, but first I gotta prepare my ginger. And to do so, I just cut these into individual chunks, and then on those chunks I cut off any bits and pieces that could easily burn, kind of evening them off, if you could say. Now I'm going to cut these in half so that the surface area of the ginger pieces will increase, and in doing so I will get more caramelization on them. Again, if you don't want to cut them in half, you don't have to, but I like doing this. So get these into an oven at around 400 to 425 degrees for about 20 to 30 minutes, and then for the last 10 minutes you can broil it so it can get nice and charred. So before we get started with the stock, let's prepare some more garnishes. The first thing here is some cilantro. I just take off the stem. So the way I like to cut these up is to gather it together into one nice chunk, and then I just take a knife and run through them. Once the cilantro is done, let's make some room for the green onions. And for the green onions, I like to just take off the white parts and only use the green parts. And I like to cut these on a bias or a diagonal because they look nicer. You don't have to, you can just cut them normally, but thinly is the key. So once I have those cut up, I mix it in with the cilantro so that I have a cilantro green onion mixture for topping later. Another ingredient I like to use for topping is some sliced raw onions, and I'm just using a yellow onion here and I'm cutting it against the grain. And make sure to cut it like this, paper thin, so that they're not too oniony when you bite into them. This next ingredient is Thai basil. Now you can use regular Italian basil if you can't find it. That is totally okay and it will still be just as good. However, I like Thai basil more because it's slightly mintier than the Italian variety. But again, just use what you can find. The other fresh ingredient I'm going to be using is some bean sprouts. Again, if you can't find this, you don't have to use it, but I like the nice crunch it adds. Last but not least, I am using some serrano peppers here. You can use jalapenos, that will be fine. And all I'm going to do here is slice it on a diagonal or a bias. So I will be dispatching some chicken, and yes, my chicken has a head on it. So if you get queasy by things like that, I suggest you skipping ahead. With that out of the way, let's break down some chicken. For my chicken today, I'm using a fairly small one. It's a free range chicken, coincidentally. And all I'm going to do is take off the neck. To do that, I take my knife and cut it through the joint. It should be fairly easy. You might have to whack it down a few times, but it shouldn't take much resistance. So once I got that off, I'm going to go ahead and take off the chicken feet by first dislocating it from its joints and then just cutting through that joint. Again, it should be very easy. In terms of preparation for my chicken, that is it. So let's get cooking. So I have a pot of water here with just enough water to submerge my chicken in, and I'm going to go ahead and throw my chicken in, along with the neck and the chicken feet as well. Once it's in, I'm going to go ahead and bring this up to a boil. Right about now, your onions and ginger should be nicely charred, and your onions should start feeling soft. That's how you know if you've gotten it to a good spot. So let's set it aside and we'll come back to it later. Once my water has reached a boil, I'm going to go ahead and strain off the scum that has floated to the top. All the scum really is the impurities inside the chicken that has been cooked out and has coagulated. And I don't really want that in my broth because it will make the broth cloudy and it can make the broth a little bit bitter. And that's not something you'd want in your stock. Well, at least that's not something I would want in my stock. You can do whatever you want with your stock. Anyways, once the scum has been skimmed off, I'm going to go ahead and drop my heat down to a medium low and add in my onions and my ginger. And along with that, I'm going to add in some rock sugar. You can find that in Asian stores, but if you don't have access to it, you can totally use regular sugar. And I'm also adding some fish sauce. So the fish sauce and the sugar is just some initial seasoning, so don't season it perfectly now, because if you do, it'll be too salty later on when the broth has cooked down. So save the final seasonings for later. So this is gonna simmer for about an hour to an hour and a half, and if your chicken is floating, you can weigh it down with something heavy. I used a ladle here. My cook time took about an hour. If your chicken hasn't cooked through yet by this time, then just cook it a little bit longer, maybe 15 to 30 minutes longer, depending on how big your chicken is. Assuming your chicken is done cooking, go ahead and take it out and reserve it on a plate or a bowl. We will cut this up later. Now to season this up, I'm going to add in some mushroom powder to amp up that umami flavor. I'm also going to add in some salt, not too much, because I'm also going to be adding in some fish sauce as well. And I like adding fish sauce because it adds more of that umami depth to the dish, and it's a Vietnamese dish, so you kind of need the fish sauce. Go ahead and stir this up and then give it a taste, adjust it to your seasoning. And once it's perfect, we can go ahead and move on to breaking down the chicken. To do so is very simple. Cut through the chicken skin where it's connecting it to the breast, and then just cut it down to the joint. And then what you want to do is dislocate the thigh out of the joint and take your knife and cut right through it. There should be very little resistance. Again, this is how you do it. So for the wing, it's the same process. Just cut around till you get to the joint of the wing, pop it out, and then cut through the joint. It should be very easy. And for the chicken breast, I first like to cut out the rib cage like I did here, and then I just like to cut down the middle bone, and then I just use my hands here to tear the breast right off. It should come off pretty easily if you've cooked your chicken thoroughly. And then I do the same for the other breast. And then I like to go through the carcass and just pick off any of the meat that's still on there. That is delicious meat that you don't want to throw away. But yeah, now the chicken has been broken down. And for today's video, I'm just going to go ahead and slice up the chicken breast. But you can totally slice up any other part of the chicken, the leg, the thighs, it will all be great. Once you have your chicken broken down like this, it's time to prepare the bowl of pho. The first thing I like to do is get a pot of water boiling, and in that I'm going to dump in my bean sprouts, for one portion. And I like cooking it like this first for 20 to 30 seconds to cook it through so that it doesn't water down the pho broth later. I'm using some fresh pho noodles today, but if you can't find the fresh ones, go ahead and use the dried ones and cook it to the instructions on the package. To cook these fresh noodles, you want to cook one portion at a time because they cook quickly. And as soon as you put in your noodles, take them out right away so they're not mushy. The cook time is only about 5 seconds or so. Once the noodles are cooked, go ahead and take it out and put it in your bowl. So top your toppings in this order. Put in your sliced onions and your chicken. And then once they're in, you're going to want to add in the broth. This will cook through the onions a little bit and warm up the chicken. And make sure your broth is boiling before you add it, or else it'll be too cool. And once your broth is in, go ahead and add your cilantro and your green onion mixture. Top it with some of these serrano chilies, and then tear up some basil leaves on top of this. This will add a nice fragrance to the dish. I forgot to show this on camera, but also add in your bean sprouts. Don't forget it. And once it looks like this, it's time for the taste test. I am so excited for this right now. Let's just try this, okay? So the noodle's been sitting here for a while, so it has been soaking a lot of the broth, but this is still going to be good regardless. All right, cheers. Oh my god, it's so good. Again, it's just so warming. You know, it it's so comforting. I know there's not a lot of spices in it like a beef pho would have, but just cooking that chicken down with the charred onions and the charred ginger brings out a lot of chickeny and a lot of kind of roasted flavors. And then the sweetness from the onions is just so perfect. For those of you who don't like ginger, it's not a gingery dish at all. It what the ginger does, it kind of adds a nice warmth, spiced note in the background of this dish. And then when you add in all the fresh herbs like the basil, the cilantro, the green onions, it lifts the dish up. Of course, the chili adds a nice spiciness to it. So, I mean, give this dish a try. Let me know how it goes in the comments below. For more videos like this, hit the subscribe button or that one right there. And for my previous video, hit that one right there. And I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you. Bye.